Good day and welcome to Critical Faculty. I'm Hani Salim. Today we are going to be not taking easy on ourselves, us heathens. We are going to be getting away from our comfort zone by engaging in the other side of the arguments of the God debate, whether God exists or not. Very intelligent people over the years have come up with interesting ideas and arguments for the existence of God. And I've got just the right person to have a chat with about this. Please welcome Stephen Woodford to the panel. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Henny. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone watching. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Cheers, dude.
Before we get into this, I want to sort of ask you about your recent endeavors, because I can see quite involved in the status quo and the current affairs. You pick topics that are kind of warm and hot and people are debating, and you explore different angles that not easily seen by the unexperienced eyes. So what is that you're trying to do differently these days?
So the reason that I have a YouTube channel, the reason that I'm into philosophy, is that I've had this modus operandi of just question things and do so at the cost. So I very much have this as a principle in my mind. You must question things. And as they say, a principle isn't a principle until it costs you. So I've never had this, should we say, disposition of I'm on this side, so I'm only going to ask questions that are in favor of this view. I've always been someone that asks broad questions and asks and expresses views that is contrary to what my camp might be. So it doesn't matter what the topic might be. It might be about trans people and gender. It might be about epistemology. It might be about ontology. It might be about certain religious arguments. It might be about politics, about capitalism. It doesn't really matter. I'm just always in this driving seat of I just want to be authentic. That's what I want to do. Just be authentic and be honest to myself, and to create content where I utilize philosophy, critical thinking to push myself forward, always being aware, if I may say so, of being mistaken. There's lots of really intelligent people in all of these topics, such as theism, which there are definitely theists smarter than me that believe in God, and that's a reason to always be readjusting myself and reacquainting myself with the arguments and so forth.
Yeah, and it brings me comfort to know that people like Isaac Newton, who spent probably 90% of his time doing weird stuff, has nothing to do with his genius, Einstein committing the biggest blunder in his life and adding that cosmological constant that have stopped him from predicting that the universe is actually expanding rather than the steady state theory. So these people have made mistakes, and so we can actually get it wrong. And I'm thinking today, hey, we've got multiple arguments for the existence of God. Maybe we've missed something. Maybe we can just run through them together and see if there is an issue that we haven't seen before.
One of the things that amazes me on that front, and sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that I think is really clear is if you look at all of these geniuses, these people that are just super smart, and in some cases, they invented entire fields that we now have people going through the academy to learn. Almost all of them, when you look them up, have views that we think are bizarre. They're not just like, okay, I understand how they have that view. It's bizarre. And so I actually think that this tells you something about the human condition and human psychology. And it's so often that someone will be viewed as an expert in one field, or maybe even two fields or so, but by the masses as completely off base on some other thing that may even tangentially relate to where they have expertise. And that is a red flag that I think all of us should have within ourselves. So yeah, just to reiterate what you're saying there, I completely agree.
Yeah, I think there's a hair between genius and a bit of madness. And you know what? Sometimes I think a little bit of madness doesn't hurt, because you'll have to be right on the verge, on the frontier of everything, and see things a little bit differently. So along the way, in order to sort of come up with these genius ideas, you got to break some eggs along the way, and I think that's all right. If you play it really safe, and there's a lot of people who play it very safe, and I don't blame them. I think it's a risky business, and not everybody is equipped to do that. But today we're going to sort of have a look at some of the of the most famous arguments for the existence of God. And I'd like to start with, because we've got like some of them and they kind of follow later on. But to me, the most elementary is the ontological argument, because it comes from a place of conception of ideas. If you can conceive of a certain idea, then it must be true. And I'm trying to examine this thing because it's got a bit of a Platonic idealistic flavor towards it. The word of ideas. Ideas is the essence of everything, and we just see the reflections of ideas. Is the world of ideas. So if you have an idea of a supreme being, then it must be true, because how can you conceive of it if it wasn't true? What do you what do you think is wrong with the statement?
So Bertrand Russell remarked on the ontological argument that it's a unique argument in the sense that anyone that hears it, even though they're almost certainly going to be intrigued, they can smell bullshit. They know there's something wrong with it. And this isn't just atheists. There's plenty of theists that are this way. Aquinas, for instance, didn't buy it. And so it's one of those ones where I think a lot of theology gives philosophy a bad name, and I would go so far as to say that the ontological argument is one of the biggest criminals in this regard, because it utilizes possible world semantics. It utilizes necessary beings, contingency, especially if you're going to go down the modal route, which today, with Alvin Plantinga and whatnot, that's what they go for. And so I think that from the get-go, it has a big stench to it. And that's a big problem for people. And also, of course, it has this concept of being able to prove something completely a priori. So no empirical evidence needed whatsoever. You can do this from an armchair. And not only are you going to get to God, unlike pretty much every other argument for God's existence. In fact, I think it was Immanuel Kant that said the ontological argument is the only argument for God's existence, because it's the only one that's going to get you all the way. It's going to get you to an omnimax God, whereas all of the others they're pretty much compatible with atheism.
Yeah.
Because it achieves so much, it has to come with a very high burden of proof, and it has to come with a high level of skepticism. And this is why, from my reading of the literature and from my understanding of the discourse, not only atheists but most informed theists certainly look at it and go, is this really the deal? And this is why I don't know if you've experienced this. It's not the most popular argument, and I think that's telling.
Yeah, but let's just sort of examine it, just in case we've missed something here. Apart from the fact that it's sort of on face value, it doesn't make sense. But let's see why does it make sense? Why? And I think David Hume has actually alluded to the difference between analytical statements and synthetic statements. So you can analyze something with your head and your brain, and you can imagine, you can do all sort of combinations. You can imagine Superman, right? Mm-hmm. It's an idea that it gets sort of manifested in film, but does it have an actual manifestation in the real world? So can an analytical statement takes you to a synthetic statement, to a truth about the outside world? Is that possible?
Well, it's quite a controversial premise in and of itself, right? So, how do I go around this? So, if you will, I'll take us back slightly to bring more discourse into this before we get to Hume's specific objection, and then you can map that on as you think is appropriate. I think what it's coming down to is existence a predicate? So if you're taking a concept of, say, Spider-Man, and I say, look, I'm going to give you two versions of Spider-Man. The first version is that he's a man, that he wears a costume, and that he lives in New York, and that he's got spider powers. And then I'm going to give you exactly the same concept, but I'm going to add one extra predicate, and that is that he exists. The question is existence a predicate? And I forget which philosopher was the first to bring this up. I don't know if you recall.
I think it's probably Leibniz is the one who,
okay.
Yeah.
Leibniz, so bringing up is existence a predicate, because this is actually almost an implicit premise in the argument that's assumed. You just assume if something exists and it's greater than something that doesn't exist. But this is actually very controversial, and most philosophers today, from Leibniz onwards, are going to tell you that existence isn't a predicate. So you could talk about, the best, strongest, most impressive entity, but assuming that existence is a property that it has is a step too far. That's something that needs to be done. You can speak about it in the abstract, and the argument doesn't provide, at least Anselm's version. You could argue that the modal argument does, but it doesn't give us motivation to think that existence is a predicate. So you have that, and then to map Hume's specific objection to it. Do you mind doing that yourself so I can follow?
So for Hume to can you get from analytical statement of a creation of the mind purely in the mind to mean that this particular idea or this analytical statement exists in the outside world without having the mean to verify its existence or its validation?
I see, because I'm not super frequent with that objection. Is that saying that because all of the work is done from an armchair, it's a priori, you don't have the tangibles here. You don't have the empirical evidence of any of these entities even being coherent, let alone existing.
Because
And without that, you're unmotivated.
Because David Hume's main argument, there's no such thing as an analytical statement. Everything is reverse engineered. Everything is synthetic, and then we reverse engineer it to sound analytical, so we can frame things like logic, like the three laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, all stem from experience, but they're reverse engineered to build the framework of the logic that we are going to be using to form our arguments later on. But nothing is a priori; everything is a posteriori.
So essentially, you've got two objections there, and one is that you have to accept a certain framework that Hume's going to reject in order to be able to get this argument off the ground. And arguably, you're going to have to say that existence is a predicate. Both of these are incredibly controversial views that philosophers are all over the place with. But certainly in the case of existence being a predicate, most philosophers are going to tell you that it isn't. And when it comes to this situation with the role of analytical philosophy or analytical statements versus synthetic statements, that's very controversial in its own right. If I remember right, there was a philosophical survey done by David, forget what his name, but he polled professional philosophers to see where they land on different concepts. And when it came to like a priori knowledge altogether, it's all over the place. You're like talking like 30-30-30 split with like a yes, you can have it, no, you can't have it, and then like an agnostic kind of state. So even before you actually get to the premises of this argument, this is where there's already a lot of people that are not going to follow you that way. And when it comes to lay people that haven't, thought about epistemology, haven't thought about the philosophy of language, haven't thought about analytical versus synthetic statements, they're not going to possess the abilities to articulate why they smell that this is wrong. But they are going to be committed because of their own experiences and their own life to knowing that there's something wrong with it, if that makes sense. So I actually think that would explain why, as Bertrand Russell remarked, everyone and their dog, as soon as they hear it, go, "Ooh, there's something really wrong with this."
Yeah, there are three different versions of traced. The original one, the 11th century Anselm one, and then it was further developed by René Descartes. But still, very, very much around the conception of idea. If you can conceive of an idea, and that idea is great, then because of that entity is great, it must exist in a very strange twist. Anselm is the one who added the predicate of existence for it to be qualified as a defeater of some sort.
Got you. What do you make of Guanolo and where he was bringing up his perfect island? Because that's like one of the most famous objections that come to this variation of the ontological argument.
I'm going to surprise you. I'm actually not familiar with it. I would like to learn about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this was in Anselm's time as well. So he publishes this argument, and a guy called Guanolo, he might have been called Gunileo or something else. Like a lot of these names, we don't really know. We have to take a punt, take it on faith, if you will. And what Guanolo did is he said, this argument is, here's a way to represent the problems. And he says, imagine a perfect island. Okay, so it's got a perfect amount of streams, a perfect amount of food on the island. It's got a perfect amount of people on the island. Everything about it is perfect. Well, per Anselm's schema, we've just proven that the island exists. Because if you can conceive of an island that has all of these wonderful traits, I can conceive of the same island, but it also has existence. And since existence makes it better, according to this schema, the island exists. So it's like a reductio almost. It's taking the argument, applying it to something else, showing that theists and Anselm wouldn't accept this, and so he needs a symmetry breaker to be able to say why it's okay for God, but not okay for applying it to, say, islands or basically anything. And
Yeah.
there's a back and forth between them. And essentially, what Anselm says is no. It comes down to necessity, which is one of the motivations for why the modal ontological argument focuses on necessity. And when it comes down to necessity, what Anselm's saying is that this is the symmetry breaker. This is how you can say that this kind of language and schema can be applied to something like a god, because it has necessity, but it can't be applied to an island. For one, I don't think that's motivated, and I don't find it convincing at all. I think the island actually just does it. I think essentially this argument was refuted by Guanalo within years of Anselm publishing it.
Yeah.
Lots of people
Because
don't follow me there, and that's fine. Yeah, go on.
because with the Leibniz argument, he is developing the precursor of the argument from contingency.
Yeah.
Because that being is not just on the island. I mean, the word perfection alone is problematic. You're gonna have to have a measuring tool and benchmarks. What's perfect anyway. That's like it's gonna be very debatable. But that perfect being is not just a perfect being. He's there because without him, nothing makes sense, and nothing is self-sustained. So he's the sustainer of everything that needs to be sustained. So the contingency argument is gonna sort of show its face a little bit as a precursor. What do you think of that as a development of this idea?
Yeah, so I actually want to run into that, but do you mind if I cross some T's and dot some I's on the island one? Because there's a
Sure.
development there that I think is so interesting, and that is that the response that Anselm received was, okay, let's say that there's an all-powerful, all-evil being, and it's necessary. Okay, well now I've removed your symmetry breaker. What do you do now, buddy? And the problem is that it has all of the same motivations to exist as Anselm's all-loving, all-powerful God does. But the evil God hypothesis makes better sense of the data, because we look
Hmm.
around us and we see these mass extinctions, this incredible amount of suffering in the universe that is significantly more probable on the thesis of an all-powerful, all evil God than it is an all-powerful, all-loving God. At least on the surface, and at least if we're going to use intuition, which theists are happy to use intuition as if it's a trump card when it's not. It's actually a really pathetic argument. It's like one of the worst things we have. If you're left with nothing else, then intuition's all you've got. But when it's applied in this case, I think that it's even more demonstrating that the thing that you're smelling with this argument and why it's wrong, it's becoming really, really clear when we start applying it to this evil god. You mentioned there about there being different conceptions, or at least this is what I took you to be saying, different conceptions of what this god would be, and they're mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive, which is to say that they can't all be true. It's a
Hmm.
contradiction to say that they're all true. So, for instance, if an all-loving God exists, by my lights, it's pretty damn okay with gay people and trans people. That's a normal feature, and it almost certainly didn't write the Bible. Like Numbers 31, you kidding me? Don't waste my time. Whereas to the next person, they're going to say, no, an all-loving God would be against gay people. It's for them. It's for their. It's in their best interest. It is against trans people. In fact, it does actually think that women are subordinate to men, as Anselm and Aquinas and Augustine all practiced for so long until we went woke and all of a sudden, started giving equal rights. And the problem is that both of these conceptions can't be true. We could argue now that one of us is mistaken, and if we was to receive adequate information, then our views can fall into harmony. But then, of course, you have the issue with, well, what is the doctrine of hell? What kind of hell are you taking? Are you taking eternal torment? Because by my lights, there is no. It's impossible for an all-powerful, all-loving God to send most of his children for eternal torment. Like if you want a sign that it's obvious that there's been a bastardization of this all-powerful, all-loving God, that's it. It's in the Bible. That is it. That should show you right there that that's nonsense. You have to find a different interpretation, and annihilationism isn't going to cut it. You need, by my lights, you need universalism to make any of this even palatable, let alone make sense. So there's just so much to be said on what this God is and whether or not, and to what degree it correlates with the Bible or correlates with a specific religion, which is what the person who wields it will tend to want to establish, if not with this argument, then certainly within just a few steps more. So yeah, I hope I covered that angle. And then to your question, which I can't recall. So if you remind me, I will jump on it.
Just before we go to this, it's linked with contingency. But before we go to the contingency situation here, well, I was just thinking, sort of while you're talking, and I was thinking about we usually can start from two different directions. One from I'm thinking scientifically here. You can start from an idea. Like the ether by Isaac Newton, because you need a medium of some sort that sort of the photons and lights can actually sort of be transmitted through. So you come up with the ether. It's an idea, or the Higgs boson that gives the particle its mass, and then you go through all the verifications method to verify its existence, or falsification in case of the ether, because it's no longer around. It's been completely debunked. There is no such thing as the ether. It's been rubbished. Or the other way around, you start with the phenomena. You start with the actual thing. With the law, why does a pen always drop every time you raise it up in the air? And you go and reverse that, and you come up with the reason, and then you end up with a theory of gravity. So with the analytical statement of something that is the production of mind, purely production of mind, to progress into the world of reality, you need to be able to test it and verify its truthfulness through a verification method. But if the subject matter is metaphysical, that who cannot be verified, that is beyond science and senses and everything, and the only way to get there is by faith.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you see the problem with this? It's just like you're gonna have to believe, and that'll be it. That's the end of the story. There is no verification for you.
There's no verification, and two, the hallmark of a good theory is that it actually makes sense of the data in the tightest degree possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas God is so loose as to be able to make sense of any data. This is why you can go up to someone and go, listen, like kids dying through leukemia, like entire species that are parasitic, they're designed to cause blindness in people, mass extinctions way before humans turned up. Like, how does your view predict this? And what they do is they won't give you a prediction for it. What they do is they go, this doesn't actually contradict my view, so my view's still on the table. We don't function like that on any other topic. Like, that is not how reasoning is done. That's not the hallmark of a good theory. It's actually the sign of a shit theory. And yet, when it comes to theism, we're all like, ooh, let's put on our tweed coats and pretend that it's not a good theory. It's bullshit.
Yeah, they think unfalsifiability is a sign of a strong theory, but it's actually the other way around.
Yeah. In churches, unfalsifiability is treated as a feature, not a problem. Like, come on.
Yes. In science, if something that is unfalsifiable, say, sorry, we have to rubbish this, because you have to say, like, for example, in the theory of evolution, you got to say, if you can find a skeleton of a rabbit in the Cambrian explosion, then here's evolution is out of the window. But you can't do that with religion. God can drown the whole population, and there will still be a very good reason for it.
I really like that. Yeah, I haven't heard that before. Yeah, it's so, yeah, evolution. They're like, here's one thing. Here's one out of many, many observations. A rabbit in the Cambrian. That's it. We'd be in really big trouble, and it would almost certainly turn evolution on its head. Great, sign of a strong theory. Meanwhile, as you said, when it comes to theism, you can look at you can say to them, what observation would disprove your theory or cause you to get up from your knees? And there isn't one, because everything can fall into the theory. Yeah, that's I like the comparison with the rabbit analogy.
Yeah, but I can see the comfort as well. I mean, I'm going to try to put myself in the other shoes, but we're going to try to do that tonight. I can see the comfort of that. Oh, this is
Yeah,
the brain that takes 20% of your energy, that likes to relax as much as they can, and actually fool the world into thinking that you're actually working hard, but you're wearing those glasses that has got the eyes open and you're actually fast asleep behind the glasses. Would love a theory that explains everything. You know,
yeah. But that's another sign, isn't it? If you want something to be true, that is a red flag that must be taken seriously. This is why when people publish uh, research, they have to declare like what their background is. They need to let
they're
people know
yeah.
out of
Even
courtesy.
their biases has to
Yeah,
be
and yet,
mentioned.
like, what happens when it comes to philosophy? Doesn't happen. Theists, which are taught, they go to like these academies, massive amount of money because people want this to be true. They get pumped incredible amounts of assets so that they can learn lots about philosophy, and then they get on stage and they pretend, yes, pretend that they got to their views through philosophy. Now, sure, you're going to get the odd case where someone does go through a philosophical investigation and then they end up on a theological plane. That's true, absolutely. It's rational. I get it. But the vast majority of the time, it's not that. And then you couple that with apologetics, they are taught, straight up taught, to present themselves in a certain way, to present themselves as people that were actually following the evidence and got there, rather than starting with, the religion that was shoved down their throat when they were young, and then looking for philosophical justification for it.
I
To
love
me, it's very obvious. I've been doing counter apologetics for a long time, particularly apologetics. It's just opaquely transparent. It's
yeah,
so
and
obvious.
just what sprung to my head right now is William Lane Craig. Especially with the
Mm.
Kalam cosmological argument, and maybe we can cover this a little bit what we hear,
Yep.
because it's going to cover a little bit of a contingency as well. Is he's a philosopher, so he's an actual academic
Yep.
philosopher. He starts with the Kalam cosmological argument. He starts with a syllogism that's supposed to
Hmm.
be not defeated unless there's something wrong with the premises, which is in terms of cosmology. But then it always ends with the lovely personal experience with Jesus Christ. That has nothing to do with.
Well, you don't you?
Yeah,
It's
it's
yeah. It's But like take William Lane Craig as an example. He is someone that is highly respected, and I respect him. Like he is a legit philosopher. He is a very
yes,
smart
yeah,
man. I'd argue he's one of the best debaters of all time.
agreed,
I
agreed.
think his rhetoric and his flair is substantial. I think it's a mistake for anyone to doubt his intellect and especially his debating abilities. He is a brilliant human being. But what happens when this brilliant human being with an incredible intellect, what happens when he starts talking about things that pertain to his religion? This is where you see what religion does to the mind. So, an
Yeah,
example that comes to mind, he'll talk about the Borg-Goof Vilenkin theorem, and he will claim with the most utmost confidence, it's palpable that the universe began to exist. And despite Sean Carroll showing, like
I know.
going to
Showed
Goof,
him the
going to
correspondence.
Lincoln, and like you've also got that wonderful documentary from Skydive Phil. Totally check it out. He interviewed these people, and they're telling you, they go, no, 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 no. Our theory doesn't say that. It says this, not that. Completely contradicting Craig. And yet to Craig's audience, they don't go, gosh, he was super confident on that, like overwhelmingly confident, and yet just wrong. And not just wrong, embarrassingly wrong, because he got this. He said of this theorem that it does one thing when it doesn't. Right? You have that going on, and then here's another one. Philosophers like Dan Linford and Joe Schmid and Wes Morriston, they'll issue criticisms of Craig's arguments, for instance, pertaining to Hilbert's Hotel, where they'll be talking about infinites, and they'll
The
be saying,
infinity. Yeah.
yeah, the potential infinite actually presupposes the actual infinite. Probably not worth going into it for now, but this is something that almost everyone in this field is like, yeah, it does. Like, set theory makes this quite clear. Every time that William Lane Craig responds to this, he completely misses what the objection is. So what's going on is this really intelligent person completely failing to understand this objection, no matter how many times it's phrased to him. That's possible. As I said, we're all there. That can happen. or is it that he's actually performing in apologetics and theology, and that's what he's doing on that case? I'm willing to grant the first one, but it doesn't look good. One
Yeah.
last thing that comes to mind here is, because there's so much with William Lane Craig, you will hear him speak about, say, Numbers 31, 17 through 18, where God commands Moses to go in to a community and they slaughter all of the men, all
The
of the
Amalekites.
Amalekites. Yep, they take the little babies by the leg, smash their
Smash
heads
them.
into
The rocks.
skulls,
You know.
completely kill all of them, and take all
Mm.
of the little girls that haven't lied with a man for themselves. Just grotesque. But under Christianity, you have to find a way to say that that is actually the best of all possible worlds. So if you go out there and you watch William Lane Craig and other apologists and other theologians and even philosophers, if they're theists, if you watch them talk about that, it's fucking vile.
Mm.
It's unbelievably immoral the way that they do backflips on this. And yet, because of our culture, because of our society, we look at it and we go, no, that's respectful scholarship. Don't waste my fucking time. Like, unbelievable that it's like this. Thomas Jefferson got this right with his analysis. Like, it's absurd. Anyway, a bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. That's what I mean. Like a very smart person would end up committing two problems. Well, as soon as faith comes in, commits a school kid logical fallacy of appealing to subjective experience when we know how flawed that is in terms of argumentation, and then have the audacity to stand in front of a mathematician to talk about infinity in math, or in front of a cosmologist, a physicist, and talk about the Big Bang, and has I'm not sure if this is like a delusion or whatever that is that comes onto him, thinking that he can actually pull that off in front of Sean Carroll. I was like, what are you doing, man?
The Holy Ghost must be working overtime in you. Like, that's what I'm saying. But on that front as well, Bill said recently, maybe last year or so, he said that when it comes to belief in God, he lowers his epistemic bar. And Christians haven't looked at this and said, that is really bad. Like, wow, that's a sign of actually, and this is one of the theories I've been working with lately, I think basically all of theology, when you break it down, will end up as just presuppositionalism. But yeah, he received a message, and long story short, he revealed that he lowers the epistemic bar when it comes to Christ. And you wouldn't get that by another philosopher on another topic. They wouldn't go, I know there's lots of evidence refuting, say lots of evidence that's refuting my view on string theory. But when it comes to string theory, I lower the epistemic bar because it's intuitively plausible to me. Like, come on.
That is incredible. I mean, considering the what's at stake here, it should be the other way around. The bar should be raised so high because the repercussions of believing and not believing is tremendous. If anything, it should be the other way around.
Yeah,
because
and that's actually where Pascal's wager comes in for him. Like in this discourse, he wasn't talking about Pascal's wager, and one of the reasons he lowers the bar is because of the threat of eternal punishment, which is, like to me, it's really obvious what's going on, And then we get all into the conversations of an all-loving God ever issuing an infinite punishment for a finite crime. Like, goodness.
I mean, we're talking about these sort of apologists, and we got different flavor altogether with Jordan Peterson, right? Who I'm convinced he's not religious. I'm convinced he's just Jordan Peterson. But the utility of religion. Certain people need religion. The world will go into chaos if there isn't a good story, a good narrative, whereby simpletons or simple people who want to get on with their lives have laws and borders that will contain their craziness if they let loose in the world. Do you think there's that fear?
There's definitely a religious bone in the body. The fact that it keeps coming up, that's definitely in. And I don't think it's the simple element. Actually, some of the most devout theists I know are very complex, intelligent people. And I think what's going on is we're a narrative-driven creature. This is something that that Jordan Peterson is very much touched upon, and I think he's correct. And also, if you take, us as an evolved social species, we're going to have imbued in us these archetypes, these motifs, as Carl Jung might put it, or would put it. And it's how do we make sense of this data? And there's nothing in evolution that's going to make it so that we have a rational understanding of certain intuitions that are really important to us. Rather, we just need to act on it. And this is where a lot of the religiosity is going to take hold and take power. And then, of course, we find ourselves in this world, and like, you lose a loved one, you're like, I want to see that loved one again. Like, what's going on? A social species like us is also going to evolve to think that we're far more impressive than what we are. So we're going to think that we're at the top of something here. Maybe we're created in God's image. There's all these motivations behind it. Jordan Peterson is a massive bag to open, and if we open it, I threat we won't get anywhere else. But I'm happy to do so.
This is incredible. For people in the chat asking for questions, and we will get to maybe in the very last portion. Maybe we're gonna allow 15 minutes towards the end. And thank you, James. I'll get your question later on once we display, because we've got few arguments to go through. So while we're at the Kalam cosmological argument, because we sort of bounce from the idea of an idea that gets created in the minds, and therefore gods. This is the reverse now. We're talking about sort of an abductive argument, right? So it's the best explanation of the data we've got at the moment. So according to William Lane Craig, Lemaitre found that the world has started. It's not like what Einstein thought about the steady state theory. The universe is always eternal, it's unchanging. Suddenly we found out that there was a beginning. Beginning of what? This is where the debate is, because he thinks it's the beginning of the universe. The cosmologist now will tell you, no, it's the beginning of the expanding of the singularity, and we don't know how long this has been around for, where it's coming from, or is it another collapsed universe, or it's one of the singularities that happen trillions of times in a multiverse world. We don't know. But he is convinced that this is the beginning of the world, so let there be light. And here, bingo, here's your moment.
Well, most apologists, when they're on stage, they actually describe the Big Bang as the beginning of everything. And they've been doing this for a long time. And it doesn't matter how many times they're corrected. It doesn't matter how many times, like Frank Turek comes to mind, for instance, he does it all the time.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter how many times or how obvious it is that this is not what the Big Bang is claiming. And it doesn't even matter if the people that they quote, for instance, Alan Guth and Verlaine, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't, like, this isn't rational discourse. This isn't how it goes in any other topic. But putting that aside, it doesn't matter how many times that correction comes up. Theists are still claiming that it's the beginning of the universe. And then if you do get some kind of acquisition on the fact that it's not necessarily the beginning, you will get this, okay, well, isn't this more probable on theism? To which, we're going to ask, well, why? Like, what information are we working with? Like, aren't you guys meant to be humble? Like, how are you making these insane inferences based on the complete lack of knowledge we have on all of these things? Like, hasn't your intuition been thoroughly kicked in over the last 100 years? You learned that, this flat earth that we experience isn't flat, it's actually a sphere. You've learned, when you drop a feather and you drop a rock and you do it in a vacuum, they fall at the same speed. Like, wow, my intuition's taking a hit. I thought that I was created by an intelligent being. Evolution by natural selection is true. Turns out my intuition wasn't all that good. It's pretty weak. How many times must your intuition get a kick in? Here's another one. I'm made of predominantly nothing. Like, atoms are comprised of nearly nothing, and I'm comprised of atoms, so I'm nearly nothing. How many times does your intuition need to get a kick in before you actually start exercising the humility you boast that you have to stop making such wild assertions when it comes to the beginning of the universe? Like, we don't even have... We've got an observable universe. You don't even have access to the rest of it. It could be, as Leonard Susskind has expressed in relation to the teleological argument,
Infinite already.
fine tuning. Yeah, it could be like it's
It's already.
unbelievably big, and thus there could be any situation coming up. There could be epochs and states where there's other universes, or even it could be in the same universe where atoms are spaced, worlds apart. Like it could be the cosmological constant is different. Anyway, you get the point. Like for me, and after studying a lot of this stuff, it you can't help but just see when someone is overstating the case, and you can't help but appreciate just how confident apologists are when it comes to this.
But I was thinking, Stephen, if you're really genuine, if you're really come across as genuine, wanting to get to the truth and not just turning up to a debate and just wow the audience. Dinesh D'Souza, for example, I remember him. In every single debate, he will start by counting the number of Christian scientists and philosophers throughout the years. He gets the same answer of, no, their Christianity has not sort of inspired them to do it. They were good scientists, and when they went to do the scientific methods, they've actually accomplished that, and it was nothing to do with the Christianity or their Islam or whatever. He gets that answer, yet he keeps repeating the same argument, even though it's been answered like 100 times to my satisfaction, to be honest. But it's as if it's never been asked before. Why would he do that? I mean, it's filmed, televised, and people watch things over and over. You know by now that this person has never conceded or never changed the idea. What do you think of it? Or is this just they're going through the motions because this is what's going to fill up the time and is going to occupy the person who's going to respond to the arguments and spend a good 2 hours so they can earn their money?
I think the most charitable view on this would be that they're just not convinced by any of the refutations. And so for them, the argument stands, and so they're in every right to express it again. But what normally happens in other discourse is someone will bring up objections, and then the next time you see that individual, or certainly when the stage is good enough for it, they will talk about those refutations and speak about how they don't think they work. So, for instance, William Lane Craig will do this with the objections that he thinks doesn't work. And this is something that happens in science, right? But what you get with a lot of theists is they don't do that. There's actually no sign that they've even interacted with the objections whatsoever. There's no sign that they've even heard of them, despite it being said to them, And when you do get the occasion when, like, say, Frank Turek's on stage and someone actually does issue an objection to them, you can see just how dismissive they are. And I think probably the best bet, or at least the way that I go around it, is that probably Frank is convinced that the objection is just crap. And that's it. Like, that seems to be, I mean, that would make sense of the data, right? It would make sense of why he goes on stage and keeps saying that the beginning of the universe is the Big Bang. Or you can't have morality unless, a God dictates it. So I think the best bet in this situation is just, assume that they're not convinced, and that's why they still express the same arguments.
So good. We talked about morality. I like the segue. I mean, naturally, and without any sort of organization, we've moved into the next argument, which is the moral arguments. I go a lot.
We get there. Sorry to interrupt, but just before we get there, I think there's something maybe controversial that I want to say about the Kalam. I think it's the biggest waste of time. And I also think the same is true of the contingency argument, but to a slightly less degree. The reason for this is, as many theists will say, it depends on the theist and it depends on the way that they present it. It really doesn't get you to God. So suppose like we take like a stronger version of the Kalam, which I would argue is the contingency, because Kalam's going to deal with causation, whereas contingency is going to be talking about dependency. And so basically one is a subset of the other, or at least that's a way that it can be conceived. So let's take the contingency argument and suppose that we get to a necessary being. As Graham Oppy and others have emphasized, there is a necessary being, something that it's impossible for it to have not existed. This is compatible on theism and atheism. It's not surprising, I would argue, anymore on either of these views. And it's not like all theists believe in a necessary being. Richard Swinburne, for instance, doesn't.
Yeah.
So, and, it's not like if we could show that there is no necessary being, how many theists are going to go, okay, I give up on God now? It ain't going to happen, because it isn't an important distinction. But it's a very good place for theists, and particularly apologists, to keep our attention occupied. Because when it comes to whether or not there is a necessary being, there is a legitimate conversation to be had. And if they can imbue that conversation with God, what they get is this, if you will, how would you call it? It's like a presentation that theism is being taken seriously, but it ain't. Because if you try and look at the arguments for getting from a necessary being to God, they're pathetic. Like, they are so outrageously unmotivated that it is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. It's like, how do you go from this to it's all powerful, all loving, that it cares about you, that it's going to reveal itself in your life? How do you get Jesus and resurrection? How do you get hell? Like, everything, like, it just falls apart. And so the theist's best move is to get atheists and critics to focus on something where there is actually a debate, and to convince the world that this is where the debate for God's existence is. It isn't. So what I tend to do with theists, certainly in my private life, is I just grant the necessary being. I don't actually believe in a necessary being, but I just grant it. I go, okay, there's a necessary being. How do you get to God? And you will find it crumbles. The arguments that they give you afterwards are, even from really smart theists, in my opinion, they're really poor, like super poor. And if you want to try and get them to the Trinity, that's comical.
Yeah, let them fight it amongst themselves, because they're not even in agreement about that. You're absolutely right. Every apologist you speak with is almost advancing the God of Spinoza. You know, so that sort of transcendent, there must be some. But once it's like, what about a God who had to hold the sun for Joshua, so the day would be longer? Didn't he know that he should have held the earth rather than the sun, because their rotation is like, come on, you know?
There's also this really interesting thing about a necessary being. It's done by a theist, Peter van Inwagen. I think I'm pronouncing his name correct. But he's emphasized that if a necessary being exists, it necessarily follows that everything else is necessary. And I've become quite convinced of that, which is a big problem for theism, unless you're going to go for like some Calvinist position. So you can do it, but like, most theists believe in free will. That's what justifies heaven, hell, etc. And yet, if everything is necessary, there's a lot of theological work to be done there. And it's an interesting segue. Probably not appropriate to expand upon here, but for the audience, it might be worth checking out Peter van Inwagen's views on this. It's pretty interesting.
I'll have a look at it, but I mean, even in the physicists and the cosmologists are always seeking the most fundamental of, you know, and that you can call it the thing that cannot be broken any further. That is sort of the thing that's, you know, it could be space time. You know, it could be, so far it's fundamental in so many theories. Until we find a theory that unifies the quantum mechanics and general relativity to get to that t equals 0 and the secrets, and there's so many things we're gonna have to sort of understand. But what if that necessary thing is a thing on its own that does not have consciousness, which is very plausible? What happens then?
It's also, how is it that you just jump from it's a necessary entity to consciousness? Like, this just not motivated. Now, argue, you know, there are some arguments that are going to tell you why it's more expected that it's conscious, but you're going to have to evaluate these arguments for yourself, see just how motivated they are. And I mean, like, for me, and I can only speak for myself, it completely unravels at that point. It becomes so absurdly obvious that the motivations here are not founded, and that people are actually coming from a disposition of Christianity or Islam or whatever it might be, that the only reason to take it seriously is because they take it seriously.
I go a lot on TikTok at the moment, because I actually refused to do that for years. But then suddenly, you know, people say, "Oh, there's a lot of young people there, and there's a lot of audiences there." So I've moved my critical faculty channel, or added the TikTok conversations. Actually, there's a lot, because you You talk to people, and hundreds of younger people who I think having the conversation with is quite important. However, one of the things we argue Islam, given my father's background, you will always end up with this moral challenge. And it stems down to what stops you from having sex with your mother? Like literally, that's how the question is phrased.
Yep.
If God was not around, why not have sex with your sister and your mother? Yeah.
Okay, well, there's some ways to approach that, right? So, I guess the argument more directly is going to be, how do atheists or how do non-believers account for morality? Is it objective? Like, what's going on here? Whereas that question there is it's basically almost like a normative example, right? It's just like, here is an example of something that you know is immoral, but how do you justify it? Like, what's going on here? Well, one way you could look at it is you could say, have you seen my mother? Yeah, that's that's the right response. So one way you could do it is, if you want to explain why those thoughts are in our mind, you could do it with evolutionary understanding, right? So if you have sex with your mother, you have a chance of reproducing. That is normally deleterious. It's normally a very negative thing. It normally comes with great consequences. So evolution is going to select against it, and so our psyche, our ickiness inside, is not going to like it. And that really is, by my view, because you're going to get different atheists with different views. I think morality is social software, and it makes the best sense of explaining how we've changed our views on so many things. So, for instance, in the West, the way that we treat women, the way that we treat homosexuals, the way that we raise the age of consent from 12 to 18, the way that we look at mental health, all of these moral changes, sometimes being in complete opposite of what we previously thought. How do you make sense of this data? Well, the theist, and we'll start with the Christian, we'll get to the Muslim. The Christian is going to look at it and they're going to go, okay, it just turns out that the church fathers got it wrong. Now, to me, this is lunacy, because what you've got is Aquinas and Augustine, and they come with receipts. They go, here's Genesis, here's our views. One of my favorite quotes on this matter when it comes to women, Martin Luther said, of the Protestant Reformation,
Yeah.
he goes, why is it that women mature so much quicker than men? Well, it's actually really simple, is it not? It's for the same reason that weeds grow faster than roses. This was a normal statement and a legit thing to say up until very, very recently, because the history of Christianity is a history of misogyny. It is. And people that say otherwise are just ignorant at best, or they're lying for Jesus, which happens a lot. So what's going on here? Well, Aquinas turns up and he goes, here's all of my data. And Augustine, well, do it this way. Augustine does it. And then like 700 years later or so, Aquinas has the same view. And then today, actually, what happens is, rather than like all of these quotes that tell you that women are second-class citizens, you have these new Christians which go, no, love your neighbor. That's actually the most important thing. And it's like, they seem theologically and scripturally more sound than you. You seem the one that's making your own religion up here. And now I agree with you more. I have the same intuitions as you, because I come from the same socioeconomic and deterministic background. But they seem to have theologically a foot over you, right? Same could be done with slavery. Bible is rife with slavery. It tells you where to get, Leviticus tells you where to get your slaves from, how to treat them, that they can be handed down as property. All fine. All fine. One of the most prominent arguments in the US for keeping slaves, because God said so. It's there. But now we go, no, love your neighbor. That somehow actually gets rid of all of that, all of those statements over there. We have to have an account for what's going on here, and Christians in general are going to tell you that actually they were just wrong, and we today, what do you know, we today got it right. That's what you're going to get. Whereas when it comes to Muslims, what they do is they tend to go, you know what, we're not budging. Muhammad improved the rights of women. Okay, he improved the rights of women, and it's like, no, he improved the rights of women in one area on some things. He actually reduced their rights in some other areas. And you know what? That was a long time ago. Now Islamic countries are completely backward when it comes to um, modernity and modern values and how we've progressed. Now, the enlightenment of Muhammad and Islam is frankly barbaric. It's completely behind. How are you going to update? And they just go, we're not going to update. So, on the one hand, they don't have the problem that the Christians have, which is trying to account for the change that they have. But on the other side, what they have is they can say that we've stuck to the letter, which is largely true, but not entirely. And I'm sure you know more about the history of the changes that they've had in time on those matters, because there's definitely been big changes. For instance, in the Islamic Golden Age, they were very secular in their practice, and they were very successful because of it. Yet they're not secular in most cases today, and I'd argue it's not surprised that they're not very successful in many areas because of that. But yeah, loads given there, so I'll shut up for a bit.
No, so unlike you, morality to me is it's a very, very good tool, and there's a very good reason it's changing over time, and it's supposed to be not fixed. But even the God, I mean, it's always been argued that your morality as an atheist is relative. It changes with time, with your whims, but God gives fixed objective morality. But is it? Is it? Because when we examine the Bible, we'll find, by the way, when you said the neighbor, I'll put neighbor between brackets. In Islam, it's your brother, because this is not for the rest of the population. This is just for a certain selected, chosen few.
True of Jews, yeah.
Yeah. So, but even with that, like, let's say is killing absolutely wrong, or is it not just to be avoided, but actually demanded by God in a command theory, which is the morality of the theist, to go to that next door village or so and go and slaughter them by the order of God? What happened then to the "thou shalt not kill"?
Well, what's happening in that case, and this is the way that I see divine command theory, is it's just not morality at all. It's just not. It is simply might makes right. God says so, and that's why it should be done. So you can bring up, of course, the Euthyphro dilemma, and you can say, look, does God order something to be done because it is good? If that's the case, then good exists outside of God, and thus you don't need God to believe in goodness, to have this objective framework, if you will. Or is something good because God commands it? Well, in which case we're not talking about morality. It simply might makes right. Bow as low as you can, or else. That's it. So, okay, we're starting to talk about consequences and whatnot, but don't piss on me and call it rain. It's not morality. That's what's going on. Now, the theist in general is going to tell you that that's a false dichotomy. Actually, God is good. And then but it doesn't do anything. It just kicks the can down the road, because you now say, okay, does God decide what his nature is or not? If he decides what his nature is, it's arbitrary. If he doesn't decide on his nature, why? What reasons? Like, does he have reasons to have his disposition? And so you're stuck with the same dilemma. So if morality is an objective feature of the world, it is absolutely available to atheists and theists. The only type of morality that theists have that atheists don't isn't morality. It's just not. Now, if it turns out that God exists, and there's infinite punishment coming if you don't pray in the right direction, or if you don't suppress the fact that you're homosexual or something along those lines, and obviously, crap, got to do it. But don't tell me it's morality; it isn't. So that's the first angle on the moral sphere, at least.
I always remember the story from The Crying Game. Remember that movie where actually they sort of broke up. Broke to the world, sort of the world of transgenderism and homosexuality, and there was Christopher Rea, I think, and Boy George sang the song "The Crying Game," and there was a story when there was the Irish soldier was taken as a hostage, and the story of the scorpion and the frog, and the scorpion wanted to cross the river, so asked the frog, "Please, can you help me cross the river?" The frog said, "No, you'll just sting me," and I said, "No, I won't do that." Sort of. Okay, well, I'll help you. Halfway down the river, got stung by the scorpion. Said, "Why did you do that? We're both going to die now." He said, "I'm very sorry, but it's in my nature." So if God creates as an act of nature, God could be suffering from hard determinism, just like the rest of us. He's determined.
Yeah, and if you're going to start speaking about his nature as well, so if God is the
Yeah,
scorpion in this case, like what is his nature? Well, we're told all the time by Muslims he's all merciful. get fucked. Like you kidding me? You're going to say like something that's all merciful is going to have most of his children eternally suffer. Like the Quran is really explicit in its depictions of hell. Like come on, like pick a lane. You're either in love with a tyrant and you're bowing because you're frightened, in which case, okay, like you've got a coherent story, we can work with this, or you have an all-loving God, and the Quran is seriously messed up. It ain't the word of
no,
this all-loving
no,
being.
no,
It's
no.
quite obvious. Somehow you manage to take the evil concept from Jesus and from
Yeah,
Christianity, and in many cases make it worse.
yeah.
Like, oh, come on.
The best you're going to get is deism of some sort of a very vague type of entity that we call God, but more of is more like a creator that's the creators of universe, and that's his job description.
And that's actually one of the things with many of the arguments that we've been talking about, ontological argument, moral argument, kalam, contingency, whatever it might be, fine tuning. I can understand how someone could be convinced of a few of these arguments, or even just one, and it lands them in deism, because deism doesn't have so much of the baggage that theism has, or at least Abrahamic theism. I can understand how they would get there on that front. So yeah, I can see why the founding fathers of America, especially because they didn't have access to evolution by
Mostly
natural
deists.
selection, were mostly deists. Yeah, I mean, if one of the most fascinating things that I've done as like a side hobby is I've looked up people that spoke about what is life and what are we doing here, existentialism essentially,
Mm.
before Darwin. And it's rare that you find in any of these incredibly brilliant, intelligent people, any of them managed to work past the strong intuitive feel for teleological arguments, which then was applied to the biology of us. Percy Bysshe Shelley nailed it. He's got a pamphlet called A Refutation of Deism, and oh, dude, if you haven't read it, like read it. It is You're reading this guy 50 years before Darwin, and he is calling out what's going on with evolution, and it's just I get tingles. I'm just like, dude, this guy is something else,
Ahead of
and
his
yet he
time.
died. He died at 29 or something, so he
Oh
died
wow!
younger than what I am now, and he super switched on, man. Another one's David Hume. David Hume, of course, figured it
Oh,
out. He
it's
refutes
brilliant.
Paley's watchmaker argument because he's an uber chad. He does it before Paley even publishes his argument. So yeah, it's fantastic stuff.
I mean, that's a beautiful segue to the teleological argument,
Mhm.
which is one, and I think it's an argument from ignorance, an argument from person incredulity. Most of the time, it's like, who created you? Why do you have, remember Ray Comfort's the banana thing? Say, look at the banana. Look how curvy it is, and it fits exactly my palm. And not
Yeah,
knowing that these were actually artificially selected, and the real bananas are inedible.
that is one of the greatest memes in the atheist niche. I got to say, it's fantastic. Yeah, so teleological arguments, I think it's better to look at them as a series of arguments because they will employ different premises and they will, work in different ways. So on the one hand, you'll get like watchmaker analogies, you'll get a creationism, which is very, very popular among Muslims, and lots of lay Christians. Um, I've not found it to be as popular with Jews, but what you're all pagans, I should say. I haven't found it too popular of them as well. But then you'll get other teleological arguments. So teleological just meaning design, of course. You'll get arguments that are to do with fine tuning. Like they'll be talking about cool, the cosmological constant and what's the chances of us turning up like this? Isn't this more probable on, the fact that we were designed rather than it was designed to be this way rather than completely random and arbitrary and whatnot. So you have so many different teleological argument. So it's hard to just talk about the teleological argument, if that makes sense.
But it's the design, the illusion of design. I mean, to the untrained eye, it seems that we're fit for purpose. The way that we're created, the hands, the eyes, the way we walk, the way we breathe oxygen. It just seems to be that we are not just a fluke. There is a purpose. We're designed. Well, teleological is obviously it's a Latin word and means made for a certain purpose.
Mhm.
Something is made for a certain purpose, because otherwise it would look kind of weird and would not survive if it wasn't fitting of the world we live in.
I don't know about you, but I have a video titled "Tier List of Theological Arguments," and I stick basically all of the best arguments, in my opinion, into a tier list to tell people where I
Hmm.
think it sits. And my view, and I haven't found many people that share it, but I think it makes, again, so much sense of the data. I think the watchmaker argument is S tier. I think it's brilliant. It's definitely wrong. We know it's wrong at this point, but it is so overwhelmingly intuitive. It's so
Hmm.
powerful for all of the reasons that you just outlined. And I can't knock that. Like, that is true. Like, that is a really strong intuitive disposition that humans have. And even when it comes to, say, the fine tuning arguments, even the newer variety, there is a one-to-one correspondence with the mistakes that we did with the watchmaker argument that
Hmm.
people just don't seem to recognize, or at least theists don't. And that is, we would go in, look at the complexity of me, like, look at the hand, look at the fact that, I've got cuticles, and the nails grow at a certain rate, and they're made of keratin, and like this bit isn't. And like, if I cut myself, like, it knows to be able to heal itself in a certain fashion, and then it scabs over, and it's just amazing.
Hmm.
Like, what's the chances that all of these atoms just randomly made this hand? Zero. Like, it's nearly zero. Is it possible? Maybe, but it's nearly zero. Therefore, we have an argument that it was deliberately created this way. Boom, teleology. And what happened is Darwin showed, hey, you just weren't thinking about this right. You talk about humility. How about having a little sip of it? Just a shot, just a shot. You don't have to have a full glass, just take a shot. And what you can do now is realize that actually, even if there is a God, he's used evolution by natural selection to create us. We put aside the fact that that seems like the most insanely awful way an all-loving God would create us. Like,
Hmm.
that's absurd. But in any case, that's what's going on. Now what happens is we get to fine-tuning. What's happened? We've traversed into our ignorance once again, talking about things that we have almost no knowledge about, and we haven't evolved to even understand. And then what people do is they draw a correlate, essentially. They go, oh, but look at all of these atoms in this right place, and the Earth is like this, and we're like this, and it's a Goldilocks zone, and like, do we think that it just randomly happened? And it's like, dude, we don't know the parameters. Like, it's known as the arse pulling objection. Like, where are you getting the information in order to make this probabilistic assessment? You what do you know better than all of our physicists? Do you know better than all of our experts? Do you somehow understand the fabric of the universe? Do you actually know what the probability of this turning up is? You don't. Like, it's just a waste of time. Like, this is the fine tuning argument is incredibly frustrating to me because of this element. And then you throw in Sean Carroll. Theists are like, look how improbable things are. This is the sign of God existing. And you go, okay, you believe in an all powerful, all loving God. Why the fuck couldn't he have made it so life actually exists across, where atoms actually are light years apart? I mean, under your view, we're going to live in heaven, or at least you are. Like, and you're going to live in an incorporeal state. Why are you limiting God? Why limit the all powerful? Like, how is it that this is what an all powerful God needs? Like, that's not motivated. It's nonsense. You don't know what an all powerful God needs. He could be able to create life under any circumstance. So the fact that we have this specific data coming up isn't indicative of intelligent design. If theism is true, if there is an all powerful, all loving God, it could be any state, and you would claim that it's like specifically expected on theism when it's not. Um, but there is one element to add here, and it's not a teleological argument, but it's rather an observation. And I think this is actually a tick in the box of theism. And I'll get there through an analogy. We have overwhelming evidence to think that the Earth is a sphere, right? But it is just a fact, in my view, that us experiencing the world as if it's flat is evidence in favor of it being flat. It is. It makes better sense on a flat Earth theory by my lights. It still makes sense on a spherical sphere, on a spherical Earth, but I think it makes better sense on a flat Earth. And likewise, I think that the fact that there is any consciousness at all, any life at all, probably is slightly more in favor of theism than atheism.
Yeah. What about if consciousness is a tool? Because I actually did a full scientific tracing of how consciousness evolved. Because
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, you reached a certain irreducible complexity as predicated by the Discovery Institute, C. Meyer and Michael Behe, because they come at the very last final scene and say, "This is so complex." But what is appearing so complex right now and so far fetched, consciousness, might have started with a microorganism in the sea developing microreceptors just to sense food around its surroundings. And just a bit by bit by bit by bit, and with the size of the brain getting bigger and bits and pieces, you create a brain that can build a representation of the world outside as well as an inner one on the inside. And that's helpful because when you do that to species that survive because of things like collaboration and empathy, it will make complete sense. I can now put myself in your shoes. I can see, okay, well, you sound hungry. I'm going to give you a little bit of the more that I have because who knows, maybe tomorrow I'll be in your situation and I would like you to help me back. So consciousness could have developed that way, and
Yep.
if you track it back, and then it will make sort of sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense that way as well. So, like, people like talk about the hard problem of consciousness. I'm not
Oh,
convinced that there
yeah,
is one.
yeah,
It isn't. And what I mean by that is that, and this is a place where, like, hands up, I need to do more research into. The philosophy of mind is not my strongest suit. It's something I definitely want to spend more time on. But I very much fall with Daniel Dennett on this, and I just don't think
same
that
here.
consciousness is that impressive in terms of it turning up.
Yeah,
Evolution by natural selection does the work. If you have two entities and one of them has an advantage over the other, obviously it has a higher chance of reproductive success. And that could be very, very simple, as you mentioned, such as, having slight um, uh, sensory capabilities or slight movement capacities. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. It could be very, very, very simple. And of course, when it gets to abiogenesis and it gets down to the beginning of the evolutionary track, it's, we're operating in ignorance, which of course is where you can stick your God if you like. But we've done this so many times before. I'm not following you on that.
and Stephen, as much as I love philosophy, I mean, philosophy is my passion. This is where I
Mm-hmm.
academically was sort of trained and educated. But there are certain things that you leave to the empirical world. I don't need to philosophically infer the consciousness. While there's a work of neurology right now, empirical evidence of how our thoughts. I mean, we can actually right now there's something called fMRI where you can actually have a complete mapping of the brain and the connections and the efficiency of how a thought would emerge, how it actually an action would emerge or the thought would emerge subconsciously, fragments of seconds before you think you thought it.
Mm-hmm.
This is how deterministic the situation is, but it comes to us as a freedom of choice. So when you spending 5 minutes thinking, "Oh, coffee or tea this morning," you've
Yeah.
already made up your mind, but you're just acting it out.
Yeah, no, I forget. Yeah, I remember looking at the studies for this. This is one of this is one of the telltale signs. Again, a red flag for me, and that is that this all of the discoveries we've had with neurology and with the anatomy of the brain, it has made the libertarian free will view, which has easily been number one throughout history. It's made it fall completely out of favor. Like, the vast majority of philosophers either go for compatibilism or
No,
determinism, and compatibilism is basically, it is
it
deterministic,
is.
but we're
Yes.
going to change what we think, or what you think is free will isn't free will. You keep free will, but it is deterministic. Whereas the libertarian free will is going to want to say that actually, no, you are really free. And yet, if you look at the philosophical data and the polls on what theists believe, there is almost a one-to-one correspondence between those that affirm libertarian free will and those that are theists. That is a red flag. That's telling you that if you're not a theist and you're into philosophy, you don't think that free will is a thing. not
Unless
in the
you're
traditional sense. Yeah.
a Calvinist.
Yeah, you will get exceptions, and you will get some atheists and some agnostics that believe in free will. That's absolutely true. But it's just
Yeah.
the high correlate to me, at least, is certainly a red flag.
Yeah, I'm a compatibilist for the simple reason because I know determinism is under the underlying factor of everything, but
Yeah.
we will forget. We will talk about determinism until the cows come home now, but later on you'll be deciding what color tie you're going to be wearing for the wedding tomorrow, and we go back into the illusion of which what Daniel Dennett says we are not the victims of, but we are the beneficiaries of. We're actually
Yeah,
benefiting from this illusion.
yeah, we do benefit from it, but it's like a lot of theists. I was talking to Justin Briley, for instance. There's quite a few theists that think that this is somehow not contradictory. It's not. It's not. Like, for instance, I know that I'm made of almost nothing. I don't treat myself like that, but I do know that that's the case. I can see an optical illusion. I know it's an illusion, and I see it as an illusion, and there's nothing I can do but see it as an illusion. But I also know that it's not true. It's not a contradiction. Like, likewise, I experience free will. I mean, the best answer given was, to Christopher Hitchens. Someone said, "Do you believe in free will?" And he went, "Oh, of course. I have no
You
choice."
know, yeah. I mean, you and I will still be pointing at the red car or the blue suit. Now, I mean, colors don't even exist, but it's very, very handy language to speak
Yeah,
because we can.
yeah. There's also a lot of peace that can come from this because, like, some people have like almost an existential dread of
Yes.
determinism, and I'm like, no, there's a lot of peace that can happen because you'll see something like someone might wrong you in a really serious way, and you will feel the deep desire for vengeance, and that paradoxically will consume you. It will consume
Mm-hmm.
you and hurt you more than it will hurt the other person. Um, Even if you get what you want, it will swallow you. You see it in people that become bitter. Whereas determinism invites us to look at it and go, that person is a product of their environment, their genetics. This isn't to excuse them. It's not to say don't go to prison. It's not to say don't, go, I don't want anything to do with you. But this information and this appreciation for the fabric of the universe, essentially, for me at least, it allows me to come to comfort with some of the people that have wronged me and some of the situations that I've had to deal with and some of the mistakes that I've made. So there's actually there's a lot of wisdom to be ascertained from determinism, in
I
my
agree.
view. And yet
I
most
agree.
people, especially if they're not deterministic, they look at it with abject fear.
It is scary. What do you think of the simulation hypothesis? Well, I mean, when you were talking, I was imagining Cypher from the Matrix when he, told on Neo, and he was offered that piece of steak, and he said, "I know the steak doesn't exist, but it's juicy," and he's going through the illusion, knowing it's an illusion. But what if? What if God was one of us? You know that song. What if God? It's us in the future. One of the, I think Nick Bostrom has actually hypothesized the simulation hypothesis, which is 33% ratio in terms of it might actually be us in the future have actually evolved, and we're this is a videotape being rewind to find out what they've done in the past.
Well, one of the philosophical arguments that relates to religion that has kept me up at night the most, it probably has kept me up the night at most, is the simulation hypothesis. And what I mean by this is, think about what we're doing with AI right now. Like, most people are not on top of AI, so they don't really know what's going on. But it is increasing at a rate that is insane. Like, you think the internet was a discovery, and it changed the world forever. AI right now is, I can't understate what it could do. Like, it will change the world, and it is changing the world forever. And one of the things that you could do, and I don't know how far away it would be, is you could create simulations so that you can watch those simulations play out and look at the goodies that were achieved. Like, you could create a simulation of a human society, watch it, look what happens from afar, like a deistic god, look at it, evaluate what's happening. And these algorithms, these AIs, are only going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. And you're going to get to this point where you can gather all this information and it's going to be very much a benefactor thing for the creators to do, because they can run all this simulation and then ascertain all of these discoveries rather than one timeline where it takes X amount of time to get to Einstein's relativity. Hey, we got there quicker because this society developed in this way and it got there quicker. And the hypothesis is inviting us to ask, could we be one of those? And then it asks, well, what's the probability? Well, suppose that it's been done, or it could be done. What follows out of that is that there's going to be one land
yeah,
of real, as Morpheus
yeah,
would put it, right?
yeah.
And then you've got potentially countless others that are fake. So statistically, we're probably in a fake one. You're getting into philosophical deep waters, and a lot of this you could argue is unmotivated. Some of it's certainly motivated, but yeah, there's a lot to be said on it, and it certainly gives me more food for thought than theism, to be frank.
Wow, because I mean, the thing is, there is very little you can do, even if you discovered that this is the
Yeah.
reality you live in. There is, you just gonna, okay, like, I mean, did you see the movie Guy by, I think it was
No.
what's his name? The guy who owns a football club in the UK is an American actor, Canadian.
Hmm.
There's a movie called Guy where he discovered he's a character in a game and developed consciousness in the middle of the game.
Have you seen Truman Show?
Yes, yes. With
Yeah,
Jim
like a
Carrey, of course.
similar kind
Yeah,
of premise.
yeah.
Yeah.
But this one is pretty cool because it's a gaming world and it's actually been played by other people, and you can see the outside world. The fat kid is playing
Yeah.
him as a
What
character,
did
and
you say it was called again? Sorry, I'll note that
I
down.
think it's called Guy. Guy.
Yeah.
Let me
All right,
check
sweet,
it
I'll check
right
it out.
now. Um, yeah, I'm gonna look it up while we're raising the other argument. So we've reached. This is a favorite of mine. It's gonna lead us to all probably most known logical fallacies, scriptural or revelation based arguments. Islam, Allah said that He is going to keep His word of the Quran forever, and not a word or a letter can be changed. How do you know that? Because the Quran says so. What's the problem with this statement?
I mean, personal experiences is they are, in some sense, they're some of the most powerful arguments, because people experience like these emotional, overwhelming feelings of ecstasy, and to them, they go, I'm telling you, I saw Jesus. I've spoken of Jesus, and from the very beginning, the discourse is set in such a way that you're going to be cast as the villain, because it's not like they're saying here's an argument for God's existence, which tends to be more clinical, and then you can have a conversation. Rather, you're going to have to be actually attacking the person in order to have some kind of discussion. And I found that there isn't really a way to do it where they're not going to get offended. So you could say, listen, I don't doubt that you had this experience. I just doubt your interpretation of the experience. Like, is it not possible that you experience something that you feel is Jesus, but potentially the reason it's Jesus is because that's the religion that you have. It's because of the culture that you come from. Like, can I, if I was to provide you with enough data, could I convince you that you didn't really experience Jesus, but rather you had a profound experience which you're interpreting as Jesus? If their answer is no, the conversation's over. In my opinion, it's done. And sometimes you can press it and you can have a conversation with them to see whether or not they mean that. But if they really mean, and they're telling you straight, and you can tell that it's with the utmost or authenticity, they're just not a place to be reached at all. Like, it is done. Whereas if they go, okay, I'm open to it, but it's unlikely, then you can start talking about the data. So you can go, okay, so we know that if someone experienced, something that is aligned completely with Islam and not Christianity, then we know that either his personal experience is true or yours is, because you're going to affirm the law of non-contradiction. Most of them, if you can get them this far, will go, yeah, but mine's true. And you go, okay, so let's break this down. And then you can start talking about all of these different views that different people have from different cultures. You'll get like 10, 15, like, mutually exclusive views out of Hinduism. You'll get like 10, 15 out of Christianity, 10, 15 out of Islam, like 10, 15 out of like everything. And I say this because of the doctrines that they might affirm, because sometimes those experiences do align with the doctrines. So you get all of these things together and you go, are you really just so confident to say that everyone else got it wrong and you got it right? Like yours is real and everyone else's is just they're deluded. Like, really, is that really what you're going to be doing here? And sometimes you can make progress because they will realize that that's not, that's far from humble, right? It's far from recognizing that they could be mistaken. Then, of course, you couple that with the data that we have. Like, a lot of religious people would do mushrooms or do some kind of psychedelic, and what it would do is it would trigger certain parts of the brain and cause these kinds of experiences. We know that if you go without food for a very long time and you fast, you have these kinds of things in the brain. We have the neurological data here to tell you that these things are initiated. So you have these initiated personal experiences, could be done from religious ecstasy, could be done from food, could be done from sleep deprivation, could be done from drugs, could be done from all of these different factors. And it just so happens that the people that have it almost always have experiences that correlate with the geography from where they were born. Is this not telling you that there's something actually going on with the human psyche and the human brain, and that consequently it's actually quite likely that your interpretation of this is false? And that's how you can make some progress on that front. But I will say my experience with Muslims is that they are several hundred years behind Christians. They are most of them are they're just back in the days of the watchmaker analogy, and so it's really hard to make progress.
The thing with the argument from revelation and personal experience, and we have to invoke the spirit of Christopher Hitchens once again, because he talked about toys, and he talked about, it's like, okay, if you think you want to play with the toys, be my guest. If you want to bring people who your neighbors who like also to play with the same toys, stay at home and play with these toys, but do not make me play with these toys. So they are not happy until you believe their version of that personal revelation to make you believe as well. That's the problem. They're not content.
That is the problem. So if someone's a theist, I've plenty of like Christian friends, and I have a couple of Muslim friends. If they keep it to themselves, whatever, I don't care. But the problem is that one, they just don't in most cases, and two, they don't in their voting. So if you look at people that are voting against homosexual rights, it's almost entirely religious people, and it's almost entirely people that follow Abrahamic faith. Well, you don't get upset with atheists and non-believers getting frustrated and having, trying to have these conversations with you when you're using it to justify harm. And that is one of the big problems that we have. We need a society where we can live and not claim jurisdiction over other people. But the problem with these countries that have had Christianity as a dominance or Islam as a dominance is, it comes down to a quote. It's, when all you've experienced is privilege, equality feels like repression or oppression. And that's what it feels like to them. So when you go, listen, we're going to remove, conversion therapy, they're like, you're attacking my religion. I'm not attacking your religion. Like, you believe what you want. And it's not even in your religion. These are just views that you have because of, funny enough, the deterministic situations that you're in. So, in America, almost everyone that's Christian is anti-abortion. This is such a product of time and environment. Like, the Bible has examples of God, no less, commanding the killing of babies. He doesn't care about babies, right? Like, this is not how this works. There's an allegory in there. There's a story where he instructs an abortion, and yet they're very definitively positioned on this, and they're voting because of it. So when it comes to the more fundamental religious locations, it's sad. It does become a cultural war that's based around the religion, and it's sad for Christians as much as it is for atheists.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think, thinking of God killing all the firstborn in Egypt for his favorite people to be able to do their exodus, and you think, okay, well, it's not really nothing to do with the value of life. It's just to do with what God wants at that point of time. Who knows, you know? So we've concluded the 6 arguments, and there's one thing that I just want to cover, and we're going to open, guys, the questions. We're going to spend 15 minutes taking questions. Super chat will be highly appreciated, but if not, if you can't afford it, knowledge it should never have a cost at it. So we will show your question regardless, but that will be appreciated if you can do it via super chat. The scripture. Is the scripture good enough to be evidence for the existence of God? Because to me, it's actually one of the reasons I left my faith to start with, because of the scripture. Because I've started to analyze what's been said and compare it to, if there is a scientific sort of claim, I'll compare it with science. I went to the different ethical schools of moralities, and when I start comparing all these notes, I found issues. So Elijah, was it Elijah is the guy who was bald, and the kids laughed at him, and a she bear kill, you know, it's like, this is, I read this and I remember it's like, what the hell?
To get 42 children. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what the hell is going on here?
Right.
So what do you think? Do you think the scripture of any sort that you've read had any elements of proof or something that is giving you reason to think, okay, maybe there's something here?
Yep, I think scripture does have actually quite a lot in it. So we spoke earlier about Jordan Peterson and about archetypes and about motifs. Some of the best works that we have, some of them are religious, some of them are not, such as Homer's Iliad would be an example, the Bible, the Quran. What they do is they're right in pattern but wrong in detail, and they're delivering lessons in life and cautions in life through allegory and story. And it's like what Samwise Gamgee says in The Lord of the Rings. I think it's in the second one. He says it to Frodo. Such a brilliant speech where he talks about the shadow. He essentially says that the best stories that we have are ones that you're too young to understand why they resonate with you. And I think what's going on with a lot of scripture is that these stories do contain wisdom, and that wisdom isn't something that computes. Like, the lessons of the wisdom will not compute with us rationally, but intuitively and emotionally we will resonate with it, and we'll be like, well, what's going on here? I'm feeling tingles. There's something about this story that is so enlightening. There's something about the story that has such wisdom. I'm going to mistake this as essentially, you know, the Holy Spirit, ghost and whatnot. And yeah, we couldn't have done it without Samwise. That is absolutely true. Absolutely true.
But that's what. Sorry to interrupt you, Stephen. Something I want to say very, very quickly is, and that's why, although I can grant the freedom of expression of people wanting to burn the Quran and the Bible and do whatever they want to do with it, but I think it's a treasure, in my opinion. This is a book that documents our fears, our worries, our concerns, the way we used to think about the world, and should be studied with affection, because this is not from God. This is our creation, and therefore it's actually way more important than what God could have given us, because it's like morality, like this is actually evolved within us. And to me, if you want to understand how we used to think, you got to read the scripture, because these capture our fears and concerns. So while I respect people for burning the Quran, I don't think this is the best way to spend your energy trying to analyze the words in there.
No, I agree with you. So, like, from my point of view, my statement of my principles of free speech, I'll burn any book I like, and the Quran will be one of them. But that doesn't mean it doesn't mean I don't have respect for the Quran. I do. I think the Quran, I have respect for the Bible as well. You know, I've read both these books, and there is definitely wisdom in it. So the problem with the wisdom of scripture is that it can't update. It's dogmatic. So it can't be that, say, Aristotle. There's lots of things that Aristotle said that absolutely resonate in the West. He's the bedrock of Western civilization's philosophy. You could be argued that, right? He is big. I mean, you've got Thales, Anaximenes, you've got Plato and all the rest, but like Aristotle just comes up bloody everywhere
Mm.
because he was incredibly wise. That said, a lot of what he said is just wrong. It's just completely wrong. Even the schema that he was using is wrong. And what we can do is we can look at it and go, Aristotle, we love you. You're our father. We respect you. And you are full of wisdom, and we will heed your words and your lessons and your stories. But you were wrong about these things. But you can't do that with the Quran, or at least people really struggle to do it. And so that's where the problem lies, because there are stories in the Quran that have great wisdom and great utility. And so, yeah, you're completely right. There's the fact that someone will burn the Quran doesn't mean that they don't respect the Quran itself. I would be an example of that.
Yeah, it's maybe it's the actions triggered by the stories in the Quran by modern people and affecting the status quo. This is what we worry about. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we're waiting for your questions, guys. But while the questions start to emerge, what would be the one argument that you've come across that you sort of went back home and thought to yourself, okay, this got something here. It's got some oomph to it.
I think the argument that most pressed me, and it probably is still the argument that's most pressed me, is that humans have an inclination to believe in the divine.
Mm.
And you see it historically, and you see it across cultures. They believe in normally something that's godlike, or at least animism. The vast majority of people that have ever existed and still exist today do not think that we cease to exist when we die. Now, on the one front, I think that this is expected. Evolution is going to want us to think that we live forever. We're really important. It's going to imbue this in us. But on the other front, I respect that that does count as evidence by my lights. It's weak evidence, but it's a bit of evidence in favor of maybe there is something else going on. And what I do is I sit on that and I go, try and be as humble as I can, try and appreciate that maybe there's something here. But of course, the more you think about it, you get to this situation where you go, but everyone disagrees on what it is, and the views are not compatible. So what good is it to say that everyone's convinced of something if they don't agree on the crucial details? Is that actually evidence in favor of this thing? And it's certainly not favor of a god, let alone a good god. But I'd say that that's given me the most pause. The second, and this is probably the one that's had the most impact on me, it nearly got me to deism.
Mm.
And it was when I was young. I was about 7 or 8. And I started thinking, and I landed authentically through my own process on the watchmaker analogy. And I didn't
Have,
go
have
into
you
evolution.
have you come across the intersubjective proposals? So things that are not objective, but it's an objective subjective experience. So it's a subjective experience that is shared by everyone. Like for example, colors. So
Mm.
we evolved to see colors. Colors don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But we all share that experience, unless you're colorblind. Maybe that's the atheist in us. We're the colorblind.
Yeah.
And very, very handy. Very handy. You can do indexing, you can do organization in your head because of colors, you can do identification, all these sort of things. But they don't ontologically and objectively, they don't exist in the outside world. We understand how it works. Could a belief in God be very similar to seeing colors? It's handy, especially at the very early stage of life of
Mm-hmm.
our evolution, when the tools of epistemology were quite poor. That rustling in the tree that you're hearing, you cannot send a drone to see what's the source of the sounds. You got to believe. Risk management will force you to believe, because that's the wisest thing to do at the time, because the risk of not believing and going to find out what the source of the sound would actually risk your life. So we evolved with that hyper active agency detection, that every sound, every movement must be for a reason and must have an entity with an intention towards you. And we developed all of that, which helped us survive, and it continued with us and became persistent. It's intersubjective. We kind of all share it, but it doesn't have actually an actual manifestation in reality.
Yep, I think that's a fair analogy, and I think it's almost too generous of an analogy, because I think what's really going on, the equivalent here would be seeing color would be if everyone had the intuition of a single god, and arguably that would be it would be stronger evidence than what we currently have. But rather, what we have is everyone sees something, and it's not necessarily compatible. In fact, it isn't. So it's like, well, everyone sees something. Those people in that country over there, they see blue, they see red, they see purple. Those guys see in sepia. That's Islam. So you've got like this situation like that, and
But you know what, Stephen? This is really funny. Scientifically, even though we agree on the word blue, but we see blue differently.
Precisely, yeah.
So what?
And what happens with God? I haven't met two theists that believe in the same God.
Even from the same sects, not just even the same.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Henny, it's absolutely amazing. The God of the universe just agrees with their moral intuitions. It doesn't matter how out there they are, but this person is like, homophobic, and he's got specific views on what to do with colonialism or something like that. God agrees with him, and yet this person over here has completely different views, and yet the world is in sepia for this man. It's it's a fascinating.
The civil war between the North and the South in the United States, for it's not all about slavery, but there are other factors, and slavery was one amongst them. They were both holding the Bible.
Yep.
Arguing for different, now the Bible says we should be all free. The Bible said, the black people were cursed because of the Sam and Ham situation and Noah's naked butts, and who mocked him, and it's really funny. But both were at some point convinced the God is on their side.
Yep, and I guess what makes this whole thing difficult is when you come to evaluate it, it's so often I'm on the side of those that are on a theologically losing battle. I think that arguing for slavery is absolutely more biblical than not. I think that their receipts are stronger. I think Aquinas was right when he was speaking about the Bible and how it views slavery. Aristotle, someone that they draw from, he absolutely believed in slavery. He believed some people were just built to be slaves. It's difficult because on all of the progress that Christianity has made, which is amazing, I think they've done so while essentially ignoring the scripture. It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon by my lights. And they've done it on slavery, they've done it on women's rights, they've done it on gay rights, they've done it on all of these different things. And of course, now today, they have the audacity, the gall to tell us that we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for Judeo-Christian values, because they add Judeo in for some reason. Like, it's just it's just laughable, but it's something that convinces a lot of people.
We've got our first question here, and I'm trying to understand the grammar of it, as Hitchens would say. Is there an argumentative progression from rejecting solipsism? And then there's some lost Thursdayism, Yesiism, Oicism, Kalam cosmological arguments. Thought, is this justifiable argumentative progression? I'm not sure if I can follow. Can you, Stephen?
So is there an argumentative progression from rejecting solipsism? Yeah, I'm unfortunately not quite entirely sure of the question.
Yeah, if you can rephrase it, please, Stu. Because harp solipsism, as far as I'm concerned, has never been debunked, even though for practical reasons you would assume it's not true. But it's almost like the simulation thing. It's you can't really prove it nor disprove it. It's just you're going to have to appeal to practicality and say, well, it's not very handy for me to think so. I'll have to deal with Stephen, as he's actually, there is somebody called Stephen, and I'm talking to him, and he's not the figment of my imagination.
Yeah, no, you're right on the unfalsifiability element there. Earlier I said that I get more food from thought from the hypothesis concept. Maybe I overspoke. I don't, compared to theism. Theism obviously has more food for thought because there's more conversations and there's more interesting intersections between the doctrines. But that unfalsifiability and the fact that it doesn't have some kind of very improbable thing, such as the problem of evil, that's where it becomes, okay, it could be true. and it's actually got a statistical likelihood that's probably more than I'm comfortable admitting.
And you know what?
Same is true of
And
solipsism.
and there is no supernatural elements. It's
No,
completely
none.
it follows the natural laws. There's nothing supernatural about this. Even
Yeah,
aliens doesn't
yeah,
have any supernatural elements. It's just different species that evolved in different
yeah.
areas.
It's like the more we learn about the world, the cheaper the price tag of that view is, and its explanatory value is low. So because it's low in explanatory value, that's what's making it motivated in such a way that we're not going to buy it, but it's possible. Whereas if it had high explanatory value and its cost was low, that's when you start getting into, okay, this is definitely feasible.
Yeah, I think he's talking about it again here because I'm not familiar with the Thursdayism and the other, but I can skip to the Kalam, but I think it's different because these are two different propositions. Solipsism is difficult to verify, but the Kalam cosmological argument is arguably verifiable. Has the universe begin to exist? The answer is no, it didn't. The premises of the Kalam syllogism are incorrect. The world, the universe has not begin to exist.
Well, yeah, but both of them, by my lights, I don't think that they're justified. I mean, at least if you're going to start looking at that first premise of whatever begins to exist has a cause, or in the contingency example, you're going to start looking at
That's
contingent things. With
that's
a
a
kind of
problematic as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. I'm just not convinced by any of them. Like when they start talking about Benedetti paradoxes, such as Alex Bruce and Robert Koons, when they're talking about Benedetti paradoxes, they're talking about Grim Reapers, and they're talking about these kinds of analysis. To me, it's quite obvious, actually, now that I've looked further into it, that there's actually just a mistake in the schema. Alex Malpass has emphasised this, as has Wes Morriston and others. When it comes to Hilbert's Hotel, actually, the fact that something is absurd, it doesn't mean it's a contradiction. This is why everyone that does set theory goes, yeah, Hilbert's Hotel might be a thing. It's a paradox. You don't get to go, it's absurd, therefore we can rule out an infinite chain. Like, no, that doesn't work like that. So yeah.
We got some elaboration. So this is young Earth creationism. Good.
Yep.
Now I'm learning some new acronyms. Old Earth creation, and lost theism is the belief in God that created the universe that looks old, but was ontologically made last Thursday.
I see where he's driving at here. So like
Yeah.
these hypotheses they're not disproven. It is possible that these things are true, but we don't accept things because they're possible. That's not how it works. Rather, we accept things because they're probable, and it's the lack of the probability that tends to make it so that we don't assign ourselves to it. Or we might have motivations to hold a different view. So it sounds like, and maybe I'm mistaken, it sounds like what Stu's saying is that the reasons he would reject solipsism is not that he thinks it's wrong, but because of the lack of motivation to buy it. It's like it's possible, just very improbable. And the same can be said of young Earth creationism. And that is that it's possible, for instance, with Thursdayism, that the world was created last Thursday, but it's just improbable, and it's not motivated. Like, so that's about it.
I like simulation because I think we're living in the sort of the border. I mean, that artificial intelligence, and by the way, there's a bit of fear. I mean, they're meeting in the Congress in the United States, and they're actually wanting to build some regulations around it because the world is a little bit too worried and scared. And we're talking about the guy from OpenChatGPT, the founder, Musk, and there is even Hawking at some point have actually displayed a bit of a worry about aliens and other intelligence and our advanced intelligence. There could be some dire consequences if we're not careful. We just need to be careful. That's all. But because we are doing it as we speak, and we are doing it to the point where it's becoming very difficult to tell human creation from artificial intelligence creation. It's you're gonna get to a point where we're only at the beginning. I mean, it's that good. Imagine in another, and it's exponential. So imagine another 50 years from now, this is going to be scary stuff. Right. Okay, so maybe we'll end with just one last question for you, Stephen.
Mhm.
Um, do you think you are for now you're an atheist, you don't believe in God? What would be the one thing that if it happened to you, you would go, okay, I was wrong all along? What's your falsifiability parameter here?
Yeah, so it's not like I'm 100% atheist. It's just it depends on the proposition that's put forward. So when it comes to Omnimax God, I would put quite low on that. So somehow I would need to be shown the mass extinctions that happened before we were born. I'd have to be shown that there's a compelling argument for why that's the case. Unfortunately, all of the theodicies to me strike me as lunacy, like just philosophical masturbation. But there might be one I haven't read, and there might be something that comes up that could change my mind on that fact. But that's the sticking point for Omni-Max God. When it comes to Christianity, comes to Islam, I put it at, and Judaism, I put it at nearly zero, like nearly zero, because not only would you have to get me over the hurdle that I just mentioned with the problem of evil, you'd have to get me over so many other hurdles. For instance, the very notion of hell. This strikes me as remarkably unlikely to be compatible with anything that can be described in any way as loving. You'd have to get me over Numbers 31. You'd have to get me over those two bears mauling to death 42 children. You'd have to get me over, throwing Egyptian babies over the ledges. You would have to get me over all of the explicit references to slavery in the Bible and how it was practiced straight up for all of that time. You'd have to explain to me how the saints and the church fathers, for fuck's sake, got this wrong for such a long time. How is it that an all powerful, all loving God that wants to communicate with us failed so abysmally in doing so? And like, how can you overcome this? I don't know. This is why, when it comes to the specifics of these religions, I think it is so unlikely, and there's a lot of work that would have to be done to get me there. And I really don't think even personal experience would get me there
That's
when it comes to.
that was going to be my follow-up question. If Jesus appears to you, would you actually start questioning your own sanity at this point, rather than
So
believing that this is actually Jesus?
when I was young, I had a turbulent upbringing, and so I was dealing with a lot of psychological distress, and I had hallucinations. I experienced things that were very, very real to me, but they weren't. And the reason I know that they're not is not because I didn't experience them. I did. They felt very, very real, but rather it's the other data that makes better sense of what I experienced then. So to me, it was real. I understand what a personal experience feels like. The things I experienced, the hallucinations I experienced, are real, but they're not real in the sense that they are ontologically a thing. It's rather it was to do with my mental state. But suppose Jesus revealed himself to me and he said to me, look, I've revealed myself to you. You're saved. Well, if you believe in me, I don't know what the specifics would be, but like he reveals himself to me and I feel it. And it's a tangible experience. And it's like something I've never experienced before. That does nothing for me understanding Numbers 31. It does nothing for me understanding like the mistreatment of homosexuals throughout all of the time. It's only now that the Pope's going, you know what, you can bless same-sex marriage. Like, only now. Give it 10 years and they'll be claiming that actually the fact that we like gays in the West is all to do with Christian values. And what I'm getting at here is that I would be paradoxically one of the most faithful people to have ever existed at this point if I was to lean on my personal experience of Jesus rather than the data. And
Oh,
I'd somehow have to understand how Jesus would forsake me. He would judge me not for the content of my character, but for the convictions that I hold. Like,
mm.
this isn't plausible.
I
Um,
always remember the anticlimactic conversation between Job and God after
yeah.
the gamble they had with the devil, and
Mhm.
then Job went in front of God and said, "Well, okay, well, can you explain to me why?" and the answer from God was quite, I don't know, quite underwhelming. It's like, where were you when I was creating the universe? As if that means anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's hard to answer, but like that's where I land on those two. When it comes to the deistic position, if I was convinced that I think that that consciousness is actually more likely by a fair degree on theism, which I don't. I think it's maybe slightly more, but very, very small. That would help. That would be a node for me. If I was actually convinced of fine tuning, that would help. If I was convinced that there is really objective moral values, no, actually, in that case, I think that is just compatible with atheism. There's certain things that I could be convinced of that I know people that are smarter than me are convinced of, and they would help me towards deism. But I'm just not there yet. Maybe I'll get there throughout my research. I do flux on certain things. We'll find out.
One last thing I want to point out: unless you've been living under a rock, you must have known about rationality rules. One of the channels that I've sort of been following for years and have actually helped me a lot over the years. So here's the link. The link is in the description. Do yourself a favor, subscribe, because you will find so much to enjoy really in terms of conversations and discussion. I love your way, Stephen. It's you've got a very Socratic method about your conversation. You don't tell people what to think and what to do. You just lead them into the conversation and let them come up with their own conclusions. So I do love that. It's a relaxed, it's a very chilled conversation. There is no compelling. And can you tell people where they can find you next and what is your next project?
I'm working on plenty of projects, and thank you for the kind words. It was very kind of you. I'm working on getting the channel to be able to produce a video every 2 days. Some of it will be responding, most of it will be responding to apologetics. So it's not necessarily anti-theist, it's not necessarily pro-atheism, but it is certainly pointing out the rhetorical tricks and the vices of counter-apologetics. I'm also having a series of debates on various topics, most of them pertaining to religion, some of them pertaining to gender and things like that. And I'm also starting to create some really cool projects that I don't want to reveal quite yet, but they're going to be very extensive and very, very high quality, hopefully, that will help people on their philosophical journey. So yeah, just stick by the channel. There's going to be a lot coming out.
This is fantastic. As ever, I've enjoyed the conversation immensely, Steve, and thank you so much for your generosity and time and chatting to Critical Faculty one more time.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all the viewers. Yeah, let's just thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. All right, guys, we'll check you out later.